Alright folks, getting back to the old chipper truck. Had to pull off of it for a couple of days. Finish up the tractor. That's done. So let's see. It's cold today. It's about 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Let's see if she'll start. So it seems to start good, but then it spits and sputters for a while until it kind of gets going. It's getting air in it somewhere. Well, exhaust leak. That's better. Yeah, it's coughs and spits and sputters and smokes really bad on cold start. So we'll have to figure that out. The shutdown solenoid is missing off the injection pump, and then I don't know what's going on with that throttle return spring. It's got a bungee cord hooked up to it, and then they've just got a cable there for the shutdown. I found a little problem with the fuel filter water separator. This is the old one. This is the new one. They're both CarQuest Clarcor brand filters. It has a little square cut seal that goes in the middle, and this is the new one. This is what it's supposed to look like, and this is the one that I took out of it. So it's about half the thickness. So it basically stops the middle part of the filter from sealing to the base, and it would let fuel bypass the filter. So not ideal. I don't think it would cause any kind of problem as far as the engine running. Just wouldn't get the filtration that you're supposed to have. This is the screen. So the fuel goes through this screen, up into the housing, through the water separator, and then on to the pump. And I think we might have found the problem. So let me clean this crap out of here, and we'll reevaluate. Well, that looks a little bit better. Well, I've been rummaging through my various pressure testing gear, and I found this adapter. I'm pretty sure this is the adapter for measuring fuel pressure on that P-pump. Well, it should take the place of this banjo bolt. So that won't work. It's too long. The threads are a little bit different. So that must be for something else. I thought for sure I had an adapter for that, but I guess not. Well, I think that might be it. This is the bleed screw. I'm pretty sure that's the same thread. Let's try it. Alright folks, we are going to replace the mechanical lift pump. That's it right there. If my light would stay on, I'm not even going to try to record that. I mean, I can barely see it myself. It's pretty straightforward. 2 cap screws that hold it onto the block, and then, come on light. There's a banjo, not a banjo fitting, an inverted flare, and then this one over here is just a hose that fits over a barb. Come on. So I'll swap that out. We'll see what happens. It's supposed to be putting out 25 to 30 psi at rated RPM, which is 2500 RPM. I cannot get it above 10, so that's a problem. Alright folks, we're waiting on parts for the fuel system, so let's move on to the brakes. The brakes work. The only problem is we're missing the spring brake chamber on the right side. So the customer came up with a couple of these Lucas Girling hydraulic spring brake chambers. We're going to go ahead and install that. It's a pretty simple process. It works essentially the same as an air brake spring brake chamber. There's a big coil spring inside here, and then there's a diaphragm, and instead of air it uses oil to push the spring back, and then when the oil pressure goes down, the spring pushes out, pushes on a push rod that goes inside this tube and sets the parking brakes. This is a caging bolt just like a air brake spring brake chamber. The left side chamber is there, and as far as I know it works. the caging bolt was backed out a little bit. I just ran that all the way in, and it seems to function. It leaks a little bit, but I think that's pretty normal. So all we need to do is just screw that spring brake chamber over top of that push rod with the spring that's hanging out there, and we should be good to go. Now the next problem is we're missing the line. So there's a steel hard line that runs from that T down to the left chamber. Well, whenever they removed the right side, they just capped it, and the line's not here. So I think they're just -10 JIC fittings. I should be able to just get a regular hydraulic hose made. I don't think it's any kind of crazy pressure. This is just to release the spring brakes. It's not part of the actual, hydraulic braking system. That would be that small steel line there. Here we go. Got a little bit of mechanics perpetual finger paint on the threads. And then we're probably going to find out that the bleed screw's got to come out in order to thread that guy in there. Alright, let's try that again. Now that it's all stripped down. Oh yeah, go ahead and leak. Come on, little guy. There you go. Looks pretty good. We just want to make sure the bleeder is close to the top. And then we got to tighten up the big jam nut on the inside. There we go. That's it. We'll reinstall the fittings. I did put new O-rings on all of these. There we go. So I got a piece of wire here. I think I can make kind of a template for how I want this hose to look. Yeah, I think that'll work. And it's all right. You use the old Moscow micrometer. There we go. I suppose a smart guy would probably have a catch pan, because this is surely going to spill everywhere. Of course, a smart guy would probably also have a 15/16 wrench instead of a 1-inch, but you know what? It can't all be perfect. And go. Well, that's not bad at all. The hose might be a little long. Okay. And I might have to tie it up a little bit, but that's not too bad. Okay, now I think we can start the truck up and we'll release the brakes, and then we can release this caging bolt, and we can also bleed out the spring brake chamber. Exhaust to the face is not fun. Alright, so let's pull this out. Parking brake should be set now. Oh yeah, we can't move at all. And it should be released. Beautiful. Alright, let's roll backwards. Yeah, that's it, we got it. I think the pressure switch might even work. Leaks like crazy, but I think it's working electronically. Well, folks, you just can't make this stuff up. This is the lift pump I just pulled off that truck. It's a diaphragm style lift pump, and I don't believe it should have been on this truck. I wasn't sure, so I talked to Brian Block, BC Block 02, I think is his YouTube channel. I'll put a link somewhere. He's a P-pump Cummins guy. He knows more about it than I do. And I asked him what the lift pump pressure for a P-pump should be. He said minimum 20 psi, like we were saying before. And then I asked if we'd ever seen this diaphragm style pump used with a P-pump, and he said no, and neither have I. This is used on the Cummins engine a few years earlier, or maybe even just 1 year earlier, with the VE style rotary injection pump, not the P-pump. Totally different ball game. The VE pump has its own built-in transfer pump. It doesn't need high pressure. The P-pump does. And this pump's never going to give it to us. It's supposed to have this kind of pump. At least I'm pretty sure. And I think what happened, well, I have no idea what happened. My best guess is that they had a parts truck that was earlier model, and the lift pump died, so they grabbed the lift pump off of a parts truck, and then they just made it fit. They bent the crap out of this line. You might be able to see it's all mangled up here where it goes through the nut, and then it's kinked right here. It's a mess. So we're gonna have to try to straighten that, kinked right there too. We'll either have to straighten it, or we may have to just make a new one or splice in one or something. I don't know. It's a disaster. All right, folks, I had to unbend the bend to rebend the bend so that the new bend matches the old bend, but not the rebend. Got that? Anyway, the pump is installed. The line is installed. Everything's bled out. I think we're ready to go. That was not fun. There is no room to reach that pump, and there's no access for power tools or anything like that. It's just crazy. Why would they do that? Anyway, let's fire it up, see what happens. I've seen some stupid stuff, but I'm at a loss for words why they thought that would work. The other good thing is that the pump's holding pressure, or the lift pump's holding pressure, so you see how it's slowly going back down to zero. That's just bleeding off through the pump, the injection pump. It's probably not leaking back down into the tank. Anyway, I think we're done. All right, moving on. Shutdown solenoid. So it would have bolted to this bracket and then pushed on this lever. So at some point it must have gone Tango uniform, and they decided to just take it off, and then they took the high idle cable, the hand throttle, and they looped it around the pump and then zip tied it to the dipstick and put this janky spring on it. So we're going to undo all that, and we're going to reinstall the solenoid. I think that's the harness for the solenoid. We'll have to do some testing and make sure that it works, but I can't think of anything else that would have come over this way that had 3 wires. Also, the solenoid I bought is for a Dodge because nobody has a listing for a F700. It has a different connector, so we'll have to swap the pigtails. This is just that's a standard 3-pin weather pack connector, so it should be pretty easy. All right, we'll test this wiring real quick. The shutdown solenoid has 2 separate coils. There's a pull-in coil and a hold coil. The pull-in coil is stronger. It requires more amps. That sucks the piston up, and then the hold coil just keeps it in place. It's a smaller coil that requires less amps, generates less heat. Anyway, the way it should work is key on. We should have power on one of these pins, And then with the key in the start position, we should have power on 2 of the pins. The one that has power in both positions is the hold. The one that has power only in the start position is the pull in. Got lucky the first time. So we got power on that one. Let's check the other ones here real quick. Nope. Nope. Alright, so there's a black wire there. I'm going to take a big fat guess and say that's going to be the ground. Let's see if that thing lights up when we hit the starter. Alright, test light's hooked up to the positive terminal of the battery. This last one should be a ground, and it is. So we are good on the wiring. Well, our kit comes with a new bracket. This one I think is a little bit bent. So might as well use the new one. And we can get rid of some of this garbage. They'll work just like that. We're going to clip off this Dodge style connector and crimp on a regular weather pack. And I looked up the schematic, the wiring diagram for it, and the Dodge connector follows the same pinout as the Ford connector, just has different terminals. So should be able to just snip this guy right here. And then I'll crimp this on, but I'm going to stagger the connections so that it's not so bulky. There we go. Now if everything went according to plan, you should have installed your shrink tube first. We'll shrink that down, we'll loom wrap it up, and we should be good to go. Okay. Beautiful. Come on, baby. There you go. Good deal. Wonder how long it's been since that worked the right way. Hard telling. Alright, we've got the throttle return springs to figure out, and then we should be kind of done with this area. This is what the manual shows for the throttle linkage and the return springs. Ours is this style here, manual transmission with a hand throttle but no exhaust brake. Anyway, there should be 2 springs side by side right next to the shutdown solenoid, but we are missing this leg of the bracket on top and this leg of the throttle bracket on the bottom, so ours stops kind of right here. It doesn't appear to me that they were ever there. I mean, I can't see where anybody's cut that stuff off, so maybe they used brackets off of a different truck, or maybe this truck had a different style originally. I just really don't know. But I think what we're going to do is we'll fab up some little brackets and we'll approximate this design as best we can. And yeah, it's all I've got to go on. So the reason they have 2 springs is for redundancy. Usually on throttle return springs you double them up. In case one breaks, you still have something holding you back, because you don't want the throttle to get stuck wide open. That would be a bad day. Just for reference, welding over top of spilled diesel fuel and on the side of a greasy Cummins block, probably not that smart, so maybe we should do something about that before it becomes a problem. I think it'll work. These are just generic Dorman throttle return springs. If they're not strong enough, obviously we can swap them out for something a little beefier. It's pretty close to the boot on the shutdown solenoid, but I think it'll be just fine. Alright folks, we are getting there. Got most of the major items crossed off the list. So that leaves just one item, well, two items that go together, but it's a big one. Lights and electrical. Well, we got one tail light, one marker light, and the license plate light. None of the turn signals work. There's two high mount lights there. One's missing, the other one doesn't work. On the right side, that one's broken, and the other one doesn't work. Well, you guys probably can't see because the sun's blowing it out, but the headlights work, and the front marker lights work, but no turn signals in the front either. Looks like the high beams also work. Looks like the two round ones on the top of the box work. The little guy on the left side here is smashed. One of the cab lights is out, and the other little guy on the top side there is smashed. Or missing. So yeah, we got some work to do there. Also, it would appear, well, the one dummy light works for the brakes, but as far as I can tell, none of the gauges work. Yeah, the windshield wipers also don't work. And one of the wiper arms is broken off. I think I might have discovered why the wipers don't work. Typically, you do have to plug them in. So there's probably a reason why they're disconnected. I don't know. Something shorted out, or just because that one wiper arm's broken. Who knows? Alright folks, plugging the wiper motor in did not fix the problem. That's because the switch is bad. So I'm just going to jump the wires from inside the cab. Key on. So the motor works. I don't know if the park switch works, but we'll assume it does for now. It needs a new wiper motor switch. Well, I pulled the cluster out, and the voltage regulator is working. See it pulsing there. And I bench tested the gauges. I just applied 5 volts across the posts on the back, and they all seem to work. I installed a jumper in the harness for the fuel gauge, and now that works. So we've got a bad sending unit in the fuel tank, and the oil pressure gauge, this is the one I pulled out. The needle was actually bent, so I think it was rubbing against the bezel there. I had some spare parts from the last time we worked on one of these Fords, so I just swapped that out real quick. It now seems to work. Coolant temperature gauge, we can test that real quick by shorting it to ground. I think it probably works. Don't know about the charge. It doesn't show anything, but I know the truck's charging because I've started it a dozen times, so I may not worry too much about that. Anyway, I don't think any of the backlights work, and the turn signal indicators don't work. But I noticed, if you look down there at the fuse box, I'm pretty sure that round hole there is where the flasher is supposed to go, so it's probably not going to have turn signals without that. I pulled the sending unit out of the tank, and I think it works. Or it does something anyway. So it goes from about 120 ohms up to, I don't know, 60. So it's a little bit different than the old, well, the one off the other truck, which I still have. It goes from about 30 to about 95. So it's a similar kind of range, just offset a little bit. Anyway, I think the failure is exactly the same as the other one. The float is bad. It feels really heavy compared to this one. But since this is a diesel engine, diesel fuel, we might be able to fix this float. I don't want to solder this one because it's had gasoline in it, but diesel's a different story. Sure enough, there's a pinhole right there. We'll see what happens. This is pretty tricky to do because it's a closed, it's a closed container. So what happens is you start soldering it up, and then the inside, you know, the gases inside expand and it wants to pop out the solder. I'll just submerge it in some diesel fuel and see if it leaks. Sounds like a winner. Remove our diagnostic paper clip. There we go. Well, I think all the gauges are now working. So if I flick the key on, come on. We have fuel gauge. I know the oil pressure gauge works. I'm not sure about the amp meter. And then I shorted the coolant temperature wire. It's working, so as long as the temp sensor is working correctly, that one should work fine. I also put new bulbs in all the idiot lights and the back lights, so that's all working too. Yeah, I don't even know. I don't even know what to make of this. So they've clipped the wires off behind the flasher. Maybe that's what all this garbage is. It looks to me like every single fuse is wrong. So this one here is for the backlights. It's supposed to be a 4 amp. They've got a 30 amp in it. This should be a 10 amp. They've got a 25 in it. I don't know. That one's right, 15 amp. This one isn't even a spot. That's just jammed in there. I don't know. And then the contacts for the flasher are all melted out. And we've got these wires just kind of willy-nilly. I found this thing sitting on the dash. So it looks like maybe they tried to crimp on this heavy-duty flasher and the crimps just failed. So I'm going to try to re-crimp that and we'll see if we get our turn signals back. And then we may go through and try to kind of, I don't know, perform some kind of an exorcism on this fuse box. Yeah, those are supposed to both be 10s, they're 30s. Okay, went through the box, replaced the wrong size fuses with the right size fuses as close as I could. I didn't have a 4 amp, but I did have a 5. It's closer than 30. I also pulled out the fuses that weren't doing anything. So, I don't know, half the slots here only have one terminal. They don't actually get used. This one here is for the radio. That's not going to be used anymore. And then I reinstalled the flasher. But turn signals still don't work. That's because both of the front bulbs were burned out. That one's smoked inside. This one actually is in 2 pieces. So we'll get a couple new ones coming for that. But the situation in the rear is much worse. That's the mess that I found when I pulled the tail light out. So with the right turn signal on, the marker light comes on and stays on steady. And that's true for both sides. The bulb's out of the other side, but it does the same thing. So somewhere they have a wire crossed, or they've shorted together, or something's going on. So I think what we're going to do, we'll just trace this whole harness nightmare back to wherever it comes up along the frame rail, and we'll give it the hard goodbye, and we'll start over. Alright, I clipped the harness in the back, but we still have the problem. So I traced that cord all the way back up here to the fender, to this little gem. It's a steel handy box that somebody's scabbed all the wires together for the, I guess for the lights. So I kind of figured we were going to end up in here eventually. Of course we are. So let me try to sort this out and we'll see if we can make it work. Alright folks, things have escalated quickly. The steering wheel's off, the steering column is down, so I can get to this guy. That's the multi-function switch. aka the turn signal switch. I don't think it's working, and the reason I think it's not working is a buildup of wood chips on the contacts. I gave the multifunction switch a bath in contact cleaner and blew it out with some air. I think it's going to be fine. I did notice another problem though. That's the ignition switch. So on these Fords, the lock cylinders here, there's a control rod that runs down here, push rod, and then this is the actual switch, mechanically actuated by this rod. Check out the insulation on that wire. Looks pretty good, right? It's actually melted into the connector, so I can't depin it. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with that. I'll probably just cut this melted insulation off and try to do my best with some electrical tape. There's really no other option. I don't know what purpose it serves either. The book says it's for the ignition coil, but this being a diesel engine obviously doesn't have a coil, so I'm not sure if it's even being used. Hey, look at that. And the other side too. Got a new bulb here. And a new bulb here. Cool. So the front of the truck's basically working. We've got some other things to fix though. Like this. It's the same way on the other side. Alright folks, we're making progress. I don't know what these blue and red wires do. Got to figure that out. These 4 wires here are left turn, right turn, marker light, and backup light for the rear. So that's the factory harness. We need to splice that into these wires, 4 wires here that run to the back of the truck. I went ahead and cleaned up this loom wrap here that runs out to the hood, and then I got rid of that whole wire nut mess there and spliced that in the right way. So that's all good. So we're good basically from the firewall out to this light. Same thing on the right side. So the harness was good up to here. I added some loom wrap. That's the factory connector. Added loom wrap, and then I got rid of the wire nuts and that whole disaster there. Spliced that in the right way. I think what happened, you see this core support's all beat up and bent. They hit something with this truck and they probably replaced the hood, and when they did, they just chopped that harness right there and then spliced it, I guess because they were too lazy to undo this connector. The other side has a connector too, but it's up by the firewall. I don't know why they didn't do that. Anyway, the bumper's all cattywampus too. It's obvious there's been some front end damage. Back here, this big wire that's melted, that powers the brake controller inside the cab. So we're going to get rid of that, and we're going to get rid of some of these other fuse holders and stuff that's not being used anymore, and we'll clean that all up. Well folks, I think we've made some progress in here. Everything's back together. Steering wheel's reattached. We now have functioning turn signals. We also have, you can't see it, but functioning backlights. And more importantly and more painfully, I have cleaned up the rat's nest of wiring underneath the dash. So the fuse box is back close to where it should go. The mounting tabs are all broken, so I just did the best I could with some zip ties. I got rid of, I think, 4 inline fuse holders. We're down to just 1, that guy right there, and that feeds the warning light for the PTO, the trailer brake controller, and 1 circuit for an interior light in that bunk. The time has come to do something about this rat's nest of wire. We're going to do it the easy way. Just give it one of these. I've got all the wiring on the fender well, whatever you want to call this fender liner, all buttoned up, all shrink wrapped and looking good. No handy boxes. I simplified the harness They had 4 wires going up top here. I think they were using those as turn signals and brake lights, which I don't think you're even legally allowed to do. I'm not sure about that, but all we have to have is clearance lights up there, so we're going to simplify it and just use those as clearance lights. I've got to figure out what to do with the 3 lights in the middle. He told me that those just get destroyed like instantly because the chipper chute comes out right there, and he said they last about 6 months. Then I bought this light bar with the 3 lights on it. It's already made up. This thing is cheesy and it will probably break right away, but this thing costs like $6. So when it breaks, he can just crimp on a new bullet connector and stick on a whole new light bar, and away we go. And then the final piece is this expanded metal. Anyway, that's the idea. I've also got all the wires spliced together underneath, and then I ran a new pigtail end connector for the trailer because it has this old 5-pin connector, 6-pin connector. So this is the 7-blade style, much more common today. There's the back side of the tail light harness. Again, no more Scotch locks, all sealed connectors. And then this is the splice here for the trailer. So yeah, I'm going to loom this up and we should be done underneath with that part. We've got some more work to do though. These are actually the battery cables, these monstrous things, and she's looking a little crusty in there, so we're probably going to have to fix that. And then, I don't know if you guys can see it, but up there, there's a switch. That's a pressure switch for the brakes, and there's a bracket on it. The bracket's supposed to be bolted up onto the frame rail, so we got to reattach that. And then the switch is leaking oil pretty bad. Leaves a puddle on the floor. So I've got a new switch from, well, a used switch from the junkyard. We'll swap that out. Let's talk about battery cables for a minute. This is what it had. They're pretty insane. So these are 0 gauge cables here that have a factory splice into a 4/0 cable. Then it goes into some kind of splice that they added and into some 250 circular mil welding cable. And that cable runs from behind the rear wheel all the way up to the engine. I don't think I've ever seen a battery cable set up like this where the battery box is so far away. Normally it's underneath the cab or, you know, as close to the engine as possible. Anyway, they're in bad shape. This one is possibly fixable, but it's got mismatched terminal types, and then I don't know if you can see the insulation there's coming apart. So the whole thing needs to be replaced. Now the cables that run, the welding cables that run from the back to the engine are in perfect shape. No problem there. It's just the cables that run up to the batteries. So my replacements are, I guess, equally crazy. They're 2/0 cables into a homemade splice, and then we're gonna attach this to the welding cable underneath the truck. Well, in GoPro we trust. I haven't used this thing for about, I don't know, 8 months or so. Hope it still works. Yeah, that charge, the amp meter is working. There we go. Cool. She's a ripper. All right, folks. I think that we are finally done. What a long haul this has been. I just had no idea when I first looked at this truck how much work it was going to be. Well, just to recap, we replaced the heater core, the blower motor resistor, and the blend door cable. We rerouted those heater hoses, got that cleaned up. We cleaned up all that crazy wiring that was down here off of that stud. So that's back to, I think, how it was originally. We installed a block heater right there in the side of the block, so hopefully we can get it started in the winter. Replaced the water pump. Fixed the exhaust leak on the downpipe. And I just topped it off with coolant. Should be good on that. I pulled the tank out, removed the sending unit, and soldered up the float. That works now. I had to replace this whole light assembly. It was all broken. Looks like that's a pretty vulnerable spot where branches and stuff could hit it. Well, that mirror's broken, so he's going to replace those. I think Captain Kleeman must have been driving this truck. Our battery cables are crimped up and installed. I'm happy with that. Got the second battery installed. I found this actual battery hold down. It's made from fiberglass at the junkyard. It's even the right size. I had to shorten the J-bolts, but otherwise it's good. So that'll work. I couldn't find a cover for the battery box, so we're gonna have to look for one of those. All of the rear wiring has been fixed and replaced as needed. I had to replace, I think, 3 of these 2-inch round bulbs, a couple of pigtails, and then I had to replace that 4-incher at the top and the grommet that was all missing. We redid the center light section there with the expanded metal to protect it, hopefully. And like I said, if it breaks, you can just replace that whole light bar for like $7. We installed a new 7-pin trailer connector with brakes. That connection does work. I installed the Lucas Girling hydraulic spring brake chamber and that new hose. I also replaced the pressure sensor, and that stopped the leak. It's tucked up now onto the frame rail there where it should be. I also tied up the battery cables. Those things are crazy. I don't know why they did what they did. They ran both a positive and negative all the way from back here to just behind the cab where the original cables were. Why they didn't go right to the frame for a ground, I have no idea. I also replaced this ground strap for the box. And the fun continued on this side of the engine. Well, we replaced the shutdown solenoid, re-engineered the throttle return springs, installed the correct piston style lift pump, replaced the fuel filter, cleaned the inlet screen. Truck runs good, starts good. Fixed up the wiring for the lights on the hood. Fixed up the wiring here on the inside of the fender liner, got rid of the handy box. All sealed connections. Everything there is good. I replaced the wiper switch. I did replace that one wiper arm. So he's got windshield wipers now. And then we cleaned up the absolute disaster rat's nest of wiring down here underneath the dash. I moved the fuse box back close to its original location. The brackets are all broken, so there's only so much I could do. And I went to great lengths to save this brake controller, but I don't think it actually works. This is pretty old school. These old Kelsey controllers, that's like from the 90s. It might even be original to the truck. So the wiring is there. He'll have to replace that if he ever wants the trailer brakes to work. He said he doesn't have brakes on his chipper now, but someday he might. I adjusted the clutch. That seems to be fine now. We repaired, or if you want to call it a rebuild, on the transmission. And we now have third gear. The 2-speed axle is working. A couple of things I couldn't figure out. I have no idea where the harness is for the dummy lights There's a row of dummy lights up here in the top of this console panel, and the sensors are there. It has the low coolant sensor, the coolant temp sensor, and the low oil pressure sensor, but there's no wiring for them that runs into the cab as far as I can tell. I've looked all over inside here. And then this disaster here for the radio, I don't even know where to start with that, so I just labeled it and they can figure it out whenever they want to. The radio's down there. There's that speaker that was stuffed in the dash. Anyway, let's oh, look at that. I didn't even notice there's a toolkit included with the truck. Anyway, let's start it up. I do have one brake light that won't go out. It seems to be related to the differential pressure switch in the master cylinder. I don't think we're going to worry about it. The brakes seem to work fine. Beautiful. Yeah, it runs good. Having the right lift pump really brought it to life. I did have to reset the idle speed on the P pump, I guess because that bungee cord was pulling the throttle shaft the opposite way. Instead of pulling forward, it's now pulling up. I had to reset the idle speed, but it's good now. This is most of the stuff that came off the truck. All the old wiring that I removed. There's the broken gears from the transmission, the old water pump, heater core, exhaust pipe parts, lift pump, throttle cable. I found a couple, 3-4 pens and 2 lighters inside the heater box. There's that pressure sensor that we replaced. The old handy box, the old ground strap, the old battery cables. And then I left the crossover off between the 2 fuel tanks. If he wants to put that back on, he can, but we're gonna have to do something to keep it from hitting that PTO, rubbing a hole in it. That would be a real bad day if we lost all the oil in the transmission, especially after we just put all that money into it. There we go. Give it the old tail light warranty.